Thank you, Quint. I tend to have a booming voice, so I'm going to hold the mic away from me so I don't blow out people's eardrums. Coming right out of the gate with the first talk, my talk is kind of a summary of a few things. So there's a little bit of data in there, but it's mainly touching upon a little bit more about OCEARCH at JU, a little bit of some of the large juvenile and adult white sharks that we're tracking in the North Atlantic, and then a brief summary of Lowcountry 2, the expedition that we just finished a couple weeks ago. So it's kind of how much can I cram in to a 20-minute talk. As I mentioned, I'm going to briefly talk OCEARCH at JU, some updates and plans, briefly give a summary of some of the non-young of year white sharks in the North Atlantic that we're tracking. It's a very rough summary, just kind of leading into the Lowcountry 2 expedition and what we were thinking going into that expedition. So, it's actually, well, it's cut off worse there. Some of the people, I know Dr. Horner already mentioned this. We have, just in the last year, hired Mike Burns, our Marine Operations Manager / OCEARCH Coordinator. We are in the process of hiring another faculty member with a focus on physical oceanography, and then, of course, myself. And as Donnie mentioned, there is more in the works in terms of hires and kind of expanding out the OCEARCH at JU relationship. Of course, if you guys were on the ship last night, Donnie also mentioned Chris being our explorer in residence. We have had the opportunity to have Chris come and visit campus a few times already and spend time with our students. He's visited classes not just in marine science, but also biology, the business school, the communications department, and the feedback that we get from the students has been tremendous. And having that opportunity for our students is unique, and I think a great one for our students to hear Chris and his experiences and how he's been able to build OCEARCH. Chris has also done quite a few speaking engagements around the city and is really helping to integrate OCEARCH into JU and then also the wider Jacksonville community. This is a really horrible picture that I took with my cell phone of Chris speaking to my marine science class last time he was here. It looks a little bit better on my computer than it does on the screens. Of course, I can't mention OCEARCH at JU without talking about the students. Just simply on the last expedition, we were able to bring out more than 25 JU students on board the ship. Also students from USCB, and that is Beaufort, is that right? Yes, not Beaufort. And Georgia Southern as well. And we have JU students that are not only working in the marine realm, but also in helping us to create some databases that we want to build, some of the logistics that we kind of need assistance with, and then also moving forward, hopefully some data mining in the kind of tremendous data set that OCEARCH has been able to build over the last decade plus. Some things in the works. We are hoping to get the ship overhauled and into the yard to have some work done on it. We're also seeking grants to build up the infrastructure, and I'm not going to mention too much about that because I believe later on today Bob is going to talk about it a little bit. We do currently have a grant in to build a permanent scientific laboratory on board the ship. I say permanent because we will need to, when the ship's underway, be able to break it down, so it needs to be kind of a portable, permanent scientific laboratory. Also, plans, if we can, to revamp the lift and also be able to build a scale into the lift so we can get some really accurate weights on these animals, which would be quite unique data that's pretty difficult to get, as well as updating satellite communications. I did put a large hadron collider in there. I don't think we're going to get one of those on board, but you never know. Particle accelerator would be kind of cool. I don't know. Yeah. Just some other miscellaneous things about OCEARCH at JU. We do just fairly recently now have an animal care committee on campus, and we're working to kind of get a blanket protocol. So for you guys that do work on board the vessel, instead of you guys having to worry about getting IACUC approvals yourselves before you come on board, ideally we would have one that covers all of the basic work that we do with the animals through the JU IACUC committee. Permits, those also now are going through OCEARCH, and Brandon, wherever Brandon's at, he's been the man when it comes to the permits. Of course, today, what we're doing today, and as Donnie said, hopefully we'll continue to do in the future. And then also with some of the acoustic work linking in with FACT. So here at JU, we're hoping to put some receivers here out off of Nassau Sound, Cumberland Sound, and linking in with the FACT group so we can kind of build that relationship a little bit more. Okay, expeditions and courses. This is a little bit of current, but also kind of future. So the next expedition, early May to early June, is the Gulf Stream Drift. We have been talking about potentially linking it with an independent study for some students here at JU to potentially join for at least some of that expedition and be able to help with data collection and have it be part of a class. We've also talked quite a bit about shadowing opportunities. And that's not just for students in marine sciences. We've talked about students in the art department, students in marketing, being able to integrate more fully with OCEARCH and give these students, some very unique opportunities that they, would not have otherwise. We've also talked a little bit about offering some short courses, maybe some summer courses while the vessel is here, but not necessarily on expedition. And this, could be for JU students as well as non-JU students. I taught a lot of these courses at a research station in the Bahamas. They work extremely well to give students hands-on experience in the field as opposed to just seeing it in a video or learning about it from a book. So I'm very excited about the possibilities of those as well. Okay, another thing, and this is something I want to revisit tomorrow morning as well during the workshop, and that's kind of the database, and I welcome any feedback when it comes to this. What I'm hoping to kind of build is kind of a multi-part database where it's all linked together just to make data sharing and the collaboration as easy as possible. You'd have a database that simply houses the metadata for all of the trips, all of your expeditions. Another database that's all of your basic shark capture parameters, things like, all of your lengths and your girth and what samples were taken and where they were taken from. Another one that I'm quite excited about is a secure searchable telemetry database. And this would be available online to collaborators. So if for instance, Matt and Mike are looking for some of their young of year data, it would be available for them to pull, once they log into the system, it would be available for them to pull that data directly down as opposed to having to go through all of the steps themselves. And then the last one would be kind of sample metadata, including the amounts of the samples that we're taking and sending to different people, and then who was ultimately getting those samples, to give us a better handle on kind of tracking these samples and who was getting what. And leading into that, the next thing we're talking about is a sample repository being housed here at JU. So basically, keeping a backup set of all samples that's housed here in a -80 freezer with generator backup. I don't think we have Newman from Seinfeld working here. I don't know if you can see that, but that's Jurassic Park. I don't think we have to worry too much about someone stealing samples and putting them in shaving cream cans and trying to sneak off the island with them. But what this will do is it will provide redundancy and then also security for samples. Samples get lost, sometimes samples get destroyed. If we have those backups, those samples that we collect that so much time and money and effort goes into, we have security with those samples by keeping kind of backups housed here. And then also a chain of custody for the samples that get dispersed out to people. And I thank Harley for that idea. It's something they use in the aquarium industry. And again, just trying to keep track of some of these samples because, you know, the collaborations that OCEARCH has is tremendous. But also, once you get more people involved, things can get a little, it's easier to let things get disorganized. So trying to build these databases in this sample repository, I think will help moving forward to make things easier, and then also to give us a little bit more kind of quality control when it comes to the samples that we're taking. All right, I'm going to shift gears a little bit here, and this is not a very scientific analysis. This is just kind of a very brief summary of large juvenile and adult North Atlantic white sharks in terms of what we're seeing with their movements. Just a very brief summary. In this kind of age class or age classes of large juveniles and adults, there are 13 animals caught to date in the North Atlantic. 5 were in 2012, 2013, and then 8 from 2016 until the present. 3 of those 13 were caught in southern locations, and I'll mention that again in a minute, and 10 of them were caught in Massachusetts, so either off Nantucket or Cape Cod. 3 are male, 10 are female, 5 are mature, 8 are immature. All 13 received spot tags, 8 of them had acoustic transmitters implanted, and 6 received PSATs. And this graph is just a frequency histogram showing kind of the size ranges. So basically the 5 mature animals are these 2 females in the largest size class, these 2 here, and then this 1 male here in this middle size class, are the 5 that were classified as mature animals. I'm going to talk about this kind of leading into the Lowcountry expedition. So talking about some of the groups. So if we look at Massachusetts animals that are mature and female, there's really 2, both caught in 2012, Jeannie and of course Mary Lee. And if you look just very, very roughly at their movements, you see that there are movements out into the pelagic zone pretty far offshore, and then also quite a lot of movements on the shelf, so more near-shore movements. We also see movements, this kind of classic north-south migration, but you'll notice that both of these animals, both of these mature females, pretty much stop right at that kind of Cape Cod region, and we don't see them moving further north. And then both of these animals come down to kind of the northeast Florida area and don't really move much further south from there. If we look at the immature females from Massachusetts, it's the 2016 cohort. It's 5 immature females, Gray Lady, Matacat Millie, 4, Miss Costa, and Yeti. And we see that almost exclusively we're seeing inshore or nearshore movements over the shelf. We don't see any movements past the shelf for the most part, but we still see that north-south migration. And then we also see Miss Costa here wrapping around and moving into the Gulf, which we'll see in a couple other animals as well. But you see in the immature females, we see that really strong movements along the coast, so being tied to that shelf habitat. If we look at all of the females from Massachusetts minus Betsy, so this is mature and immature, again, we see no movement into Canadian shelf waters. We do see out here in the open ocean in the kind of the pelagic zone, but we don't see any movements around the Canada shelf, so Nova Scotia and Newfoundland for the most part. The only one we see here is well offshore off the shelf. If we look at Betsy, Betsy's a little bit odd in that she had quite sporadic detections. So we got detections over quite a long period of time, but they were quite sporadic. A lot of them were low quality, the kind of B-class detections when it comes to Argos. And she may be an exception because you can see she did move up to that Nova Scotia area very briefly. I actually looked to see what the quality of those detections were, and I believe one of them was a 1, one of them was an A, and one of them was a B. So she likely did visit there, but it's hard to say whether she spent much time there because her overall, her detections were quite low. Catherine's quite interesting. So Catherine, I believe, I was looking at the database this morning. She was 14.2 feet. So she was right around 420, I think, centimeters. Classified as immature, but she was probably getting close to maturity. And one thing that we see with Catherine is if you look, so I kind of broke it down August to August. August 13 to August 14, we see that traditional kind of what we see with the other immature animals, that more near shore and staying on the shelf. Once we move to the following year, 14, 15, we begin to see some movements offshore, but it's really 15, 16 where we see her spending quite a bit of her time out in those pelagic waters. She may have just reached maturity then. It might have been her first pregnancy, going offshore to gestate or find some food, basically get away from probably some of those other animals. So Catherine was quite interesting looking at her movements. If we look at the males from Massachusetts, we have Cisco and George, one immature and one mature. We see almost exclusively, again, this near-shore shelf movement, and there's pretty much no northern movement past Massachusetts. There's one exception. George had one data point up there in the Bay of Fundy, but that was the only detection for him past Massachusetts. Now, if we look at the three sharks that were not caught in Massachusetts, so this is Lydia, the mature female, caught right out here outside the St. Johns River. Hilton and Savannah. Hilton was a mature male, Savannah an immature female, both caught in Hilton Head. And we see when we look at Hilton and Savannah, so the mature male and the immature female, again, predominantly shelf-oriented. However, both of them seem to bypass the Massachusetts waters and use the waters off of Nova Scotia. Especially Hilton. Hilton hung out there for quite a long time. Lots of good detections from him, tight into shore. If we look at Lydia, Lydia is probably the most pelagic in terms of all the sharks that we have in the North Atlantic. She has actually spent a little bit of time in Massachusetts, but then she's also been up around Nova Scotia and Newfoundland. So these three animals that weren't caught in Massachusetts, but caught more in these winter areas, all three of them at least spent some time, and some quite a lot of time, in these Canadian shelf waters. So moving forward, what I'd like to do again is standardize the database with all of the telemetry data, including metadata, clean up and filter this a little bit better, and get a better handle on these movements. But we definitely see that there might be another summer area for these white sharks, particularly further north, off of Nova Scotia and potentially Newfoundland. So the goals of the Lowcountry expedition, the kind of spatial justification of that is, Lydia, Hilton, and Savannah may be potentially using different summer habitats. It might be a different subpopulation. It might just be kind of separating mating and feeding areas. But it shows that we need to sample different areas besides, that Massachusetts region. Are there maybe more Cape Cod white sharks and Canada whites, and during the winter they get pushed down to Florida, where you actually see almost like a compression of the population, which we see from some other species. All right, I'm running out of time. We also see a temporal justification. So the first Lowcountry expedition in 2017, these lines right here, this gray straight line and the red one, is kind of the preferred water temperatures that Brett likes to fish in, that kind of 55 to 65 degree Fahrenheit water. And you see, this is taken from the Scripps Wave Rider buoy right off of Fernandina Beach. And this shaded in area was the expedition in 2017. And you can see that for most of the expeditions, the water was slightly warmer than what seems to be preferred by these white sharks. January and February, there were slightly cooler waters. So the thinking was, let's set the expedition slightly earlier. So we decided mid-January to early February this year. However, this is the same graph with the same buoy data from the same area just this year instead of last year. The time scale is a little bit different, but you can see these lines are the exact same, at the exact same level, and you can see how cold the water was when we were fishing this year. Again, looking at the data from the previous year, it made sense to start a little bit earlier. We just had an extremely cold December and January this year. So where were the sharks? A lot of them seem to move south. Hilton was quite a bit offshore, but he seemed to kind of like that Georgia area, but he was a bit further offshore. Where were we? We mainly fished in this little polygon right here. And I don't know if you can see it very well, but these are kind of the dates and the locations where we fished. So we did try and head south. We did try and get offshore where we could see that there was some warmer water, but weather kept us from going offshore. We did try Hilton Head for a couple of days where last year they had success with Hilton and Savannah, but that's kind of where we were fishing. And again, the combination of the cold inshore waters and the rough offshore waters kind of was a double whammy for us on this expedition. So water temps and sea state really were working against us on this expedition. It was still definitely fruitful in terms of outreach, education, and building and strengthening collaborations. In the future, next expedition, as I mentioned, Gulf Stream Drift, we're hoping to expand the scope of the work, bringing on board an oceanographer, maybe a turtle person, a marine mammal person, because who knows what we may see in that Gulf Stream. Fall 2018, maybe Canada. Maybe if we do Canada, we can incorporate some Greenland shark work with some potential collaborators up there. And then, of course, mining the database, which I'd like to discuss a little bit more tomorrow. So I know I ran over. I promise you that's not a mugshot. That's actually my student ID when I was a graduate student. So you can see, not very happy as a grad student, very happy at JU. Thank you. Sorry I ran over.